conquering the spirit, I'm busting through the ceiling. I'm following your lead, I'm following the spirit.
Hey guys, welcome back. So in today's video, I'm going to be reading from the book of Deuteronomy in a moment, and we're going to be looking into the Rapheim, the Nephilim, and how they relate to a certain king mentioned in the Bible, along with a few other bits and bobs, but we're going to come to that in a moment. First off, I just wanted to say, when I was walking through the hills of Wales, like a few months back now, I started noticing, like, obviously there's old mines, there's old mines and things like that. But when I was walking along the beach, I started finding things like this. Sorry, it's just breaking apart in my hand now. It's iron ore. It's raw iron found in rocks and things like that. And I was finding lots of it. It was scattered all over the place. Now, I picked these bits up after the tide had gone out. I took a walk along the beach, walked out with the tide, and where the rock started to end and it turned into pure silt and sand. Obviously that was the borderline where I walked, and I was finding all these almost like teardrop shaped. That obviously looks a bit like a thumb, which is a bit weird, but I was finding all this teardrop shaped iron ore, and it got me thinking, and I forgot to make a video about this months ago, and it got me thinking that perhaps this iron was from some kind of impact, some comet or meteorite impact. Obviously there's the famous comet impact that's believed to have took place around the 6th, 7th century, there or thereabouts, depending on who you listen to. And if a comet did come in and impact, and it broke up into fragments and littered the land, pebble dashed, if you will, the whole of Great Britain really over into Scandinavia and parts of Bolivia or South America allegedly, then surely there'd be chunks that had come flying off. Oh, that was just broken in the hand. It's interesting that you can see inside and it's a totally different colour. Interesting. But yeah, big chunks like this bloop, would look like that, where they'd hit the water and started to cool instantly. So that's what I was thinking when I found these. But on my same trip to Wales, I came across this old book, which I'm going to read in a moment, which is a pictographic Bible, and to be honest, it cost me 50p. Can you believe that? So it was quite a steal. But just before I come on to that, obviously I've been making videos regarding the Trojan War, potentially in Great Britain, and the Troad being basically ancient Laregia and things like this. Now, and there's still a lot more to come on that, of course, but one of the catalysts, well, the catalyst that is alleged, the main reason was Helen of Sparta becoming Helen of Troy, which is the face that launched 1,000 ships. Yet, if you do follow this, Argos in France, Achilles coming from the Netherlands and that region, and all these other kingdoms, Crete up in Scandinavia, which I still haven't done that video, but I need to do, then we go on that basis on the geography. When you listen to the different accounts of the Trojan War, which I did do the audio book on the channel, if anyone's had time to listen to that, you'll hear how Agamemnon, his brother, obviously Agamemnon's the high king of the Achaeans and the Greeks. Well, he sends his brother and Ulysses or Odysseus, whichever way you want to call him, and they go to Troy over in the Troad, which I believe was Cambridgeshire or the GogMagog hills, as we come back to in a little bit. And when they're over there, they were not happy how they were treated. They basically went over there to try and avoid the conflict, or so it's told. More so from Dicates, or Dicatus' version, as he tells it from that Achaean Greek perspective. So obviously the Trojans are barbarians in his eyes. And he allegedly tried to avoid a large-scale conflict. Well, one of the reasons why it probably broke down the negotiations was because they didn't have much to offer the people of the Trode or Britain, as the mineral wealth of Great Britain was vastly superior to many of these other kingdoms that banded together to invade. So one of the main theories is that it was a conflict over material resources and mineral resources. Obviously the Trode was supposed to be rich in horses. It had lush fertile fields. It had many mines, including where I left the Great Ross Broadstock's tribute over on the Great Orme. You had mines everywhere. Totnes down in the south, which was believed to have been the landing point for Brutus on his return, when he returned to Britain many years after the Trojan conflict, which of course I postulate, why would he go to Anatolia to then come to Britain? It seems like he went to Anatolia to pick up migrants that had left Britain, to gather as many of the migrants as he could to return them back to the original source of where Troy was, Great Britain, Cambridgeshire, East Anglia, that area. So you had, maybe he landed at Totnes because the first thing he wanted to do was recapture the mines, recapture that mineral wealth, so it could help pay for his armies and his conquest when he then unified Britain after he'd lost out in France. But that, I'm going off topic now. But so yeah, the Greeks and stuff like that, they couldn't offer anything, and the British already had all this material wealth, along with a well-established trade network, because they had many ships as well. You'll hear the stories as you go through the audiobook, or someone buys my book, of Darius and Dicates, where the Trojans are well travelled, they're well versed in travel, and they have got many friends and allied partners outside of this northwestern European epicenter, if you will. Now, so we're going to move on from Troy. Like I say, I just wanted to put that into context, that the minerals of Great Britain has kind of always been fought over, and like I say, perhaps this is from a comet impact, perhaps it's just natural, and we just got natural wealth all scattered around all over the floor. There's been some work done by Peter Cheeseburger, I think that's his name, sorry if I've got it wrong, I'm sure it's Cheeseburger, and he's part of the Britain's Hidden History community. The second community, obviously a lot of us were removed from Britain's Hidden History, Ross's former group, so we've kind of reconnected and started a new community with the same ethos, really. And he's done a lot of work down in places like Portsmouth, Dartmoor, and other places like that, where he's found a lot of mining took place. There was also a lot more structure than people thought in that area. He's managed to use some LiDAR imagery, along with some older photography and ordnance maps, and really put together a nice little picture of the area, which, to be honest, I wouldn't mind having a little look into something similar myself and try and use some similar techniques over in Cambridgeshire. I know people have done this stuff before, so I wouldn't be starting from scratch, but that's something to keep an eye out for. So yeah, there's this wealth all over Great Britain, and like I say, I'd bought this book at the same time I'd found these items, and as I was flicking through the book, it literally popped open on this page. Now, I'm going to read just this verse, and then I've got some stuff up on the internet that we're going to follow on from this. So you've got King Og's iron bedstead was probably his sarcophagus. When Deuteronomy was written, most likely during the 7th century BC, iron was common in the Near East and widely used to make weapons such as his axe head, which dates from the period, this axe head, and I'll put a photograph of that. However, at the time of Og's death, just prior to the entry of the Israelites into Canaan, iron was still very rare and precious, and available only in its natural form. That is, as meteoric fragments. Get on that. It is likely, therefore, that Og's huge tomb would have been made not from pure iron, but from a rock in which traces of iron were found. So, this is the material that's being discussed was used to make the sarcophagus of this King Og's tomb, or sarcophagus. So King Og, who's this King Og? The name stuck out to me straight away because, as I referenced earlier on in the video, we're aware of places called the GogMagog Hills, which is in East Anglia. So I've done a little bit of looking up onto this Og, and it does make some references in this book. To be honest, there's a lot of stuff in here. Goes on to say, like, besides, I'll just go back just a touch here. So I sent messengers to Sihon the words of peace, saying, let us pass through your land. I will go only by the road and will not turn aside. Sell me food and water and let me pass on foot, and I will go over the Jordan into the land which the Lord God gives us. But Sihon would not let us pass. The Lord hardened his spirit, and he might give him into our hand. Sihon and all his people came out to battle against us, and the Lord gave him over to us, and we defeated him. We captured his cities and utterly destroyed the men, women, and children. We left no one remaining, only the cattle that we took for spoil. So I just wanted to read that out because it's context for the next part. Now, this is supposed to be Moses, and like I say, this is the book of Deuteronomy. This is Moses and the tribes, once they've left Egypt, trying to find a way to the land that was promised, the Holy Land. So we carry on. Then we turned and went up to Bashan, and Og, the king of Bashan, and all his people came out to battle against us, but the Lord gave him into our hands also. There was not a city we did not take from them, 60 cities, the whole kingdom of Bashan, all fortified with high walls, gates, and bars, besides very many unwalled villages. We utterly destroyed them, and we did Sihon, the king of the Amorites, until no survivors were left, but all the cattle and the spoil of the cities we took as booty. And behold, the iron bedstead of Og, and the king of Bashan, was 13 and a half feet long and 6 feet wide. So I'm like, okay, so we've got this Og now, who's king of Bashan, not Britain, but Bashan. I did for a moment think etymologically and was like, is there a connection there? But then obviously you've got this other king, Sihon, who was the king of the Amorites. Now the Amorites is one branch of two sons who created two kingdoms, and they're the lineage of, I can't remember the name right now, but there was a person who went to a cave with his daughters, and allegedly his daughters got him drunk and laid with him, got with him, got pregnant, and they birthed children that then went on to become them kingdoms. One of them is the Amorites. So I'm like, bloody hell, we got this King Og here. His bed's made out of this iron ore that's literally scattered all over Britain. He's king of a people and a kingdom called Bashan. It's got 60 cities, walled cities, allegedly. And then when you also listen to, like I say, the Trojan stuff, Achilles apparently attacked, I believe it was 20 cities. And, you know, then you've got people like Ajax and people like that who also went and attacked other cities. So all that was starting to coalesce in my mind, and I was like, there might be something going on here. So initially I tried to turn to this book, Moses and the Hieroglyphs by Wilson and Blackett. I have gone through some of this book, and to be completely honest, I couldn't really find any mentions of King Og. Now, considering this is supposed to be Moses and how he migrated, and how Moses has a connection with Britain, and the hieroglyphs have got a connection to, the ancient British language, or the Cymric language, which it's open for debate if that's the oldest language, to be honest. I've been reading a book on etymology, and it seems like, well, obviously the English language is closer connected to the Romance languages by like 60%, and there's like 20 odd percent Germanic influence in there. Now, who knows how old the actual Old English language is, if it's actually picked up all these other pieces as time's gone by. Obviously you had the Roman influence and the Latin influence, which added the Romance element, which that Latin language obviously evolved into French, Spanish, etc. So who knows on that language side of things. But obviously Wilson and Blackett definitely believe that there's a Cymric connection to Wales. So I just want to show you this image on the back real quick. If you remember some of the recent videos I've did, especially regarding L.A. Waddle and his connection with, he ties in the Hitto, Sumerian, Brythonic connection through Carthage, the Levant, the Phoenicians, and all the way along the Mediterranean to Britain through signs, symbols, language, and all this kind of stuff. And he actually called the British, the Barats. So you got Bashan, British, Barats, you know, who knows. But so this is Wilson and Blackett's connections here, and he believes where people stopped off and how they travelled to and where from. Well, that is a very similar map to, like I say, what I've shared in a previous video, that, and I'll probably share it again now for you guys. It was actually the connection of the trade routes that helped establish this mighty Trojan element in Britain. And obviously you had an older migration from Brutus, which was the Alban migration, which is believed to have been around, say, 1500 BC, around that period. So I believe the Trojan War, if it did take place, or this conflict, was around 3100 BCE, give or take, to be honest. There could have been a number of conflicts going on, and it built up and led to this, and then it could have been an aftermath of the conflict, and that's why you see a stretched out chronology when it comes to the migrations in, out. You know, as I touched on in a previous video, the Danans, when they landed in Crete, and how they destroyed this Minoan, Mycenae culture that existed there, and you had a whole new language that came in, a whole new group of people, and these people ended up expanding outwards over into Western Anatolia and the surrounding areas, and then obviously you had this giant conflict that took place throughout Greece, and the only nation to survive in terms of the Mycenaean nations was Athens itself. And just bear with me for a moment. If you go and read Plato's work, I'm not too sure which part it is, but he talks about how, and I got this off other people. I've listened to Plato's audiobooks, but I've never read the works because I'm a slow reader and I've got bloody so much to read. But he does make reference to the Atlanteans getting into a conflict with the Greeks, and Athens was a city that repelled these invading Atlanteans. Now people go on like Atlantis was a big, the city, interlocking city with several circles. There's obviously theories that Atlantis is in Mauritania. It's an island in one of the Azores. It was further out into the Atlantic and it sank under the waves. But part of me can't help but think the Atlanteans was this Atlantic culture. So you've got all these Celtic nations they're called the Western Celts or the Atlantic Celts. You've got the Iberian Celts, you've got the Irish Celts, the Hibernian Celts, all this, the Guanches, the Berbers, all these nations in that northwestern section of Europe and Africa. So my mind goes to that. Obviously Plato was told this by an Egyptian priest in Egypt. Was that Egypt over in ancient Egypt where we know of today, or as I've mentioned in the past, Culmians Beaumont believes Egypt was in Lancashire in Britain. And then you've got Iman Wilkins, who we're going to come on to in a moment. He believes that Egypt was like Normandy in France, which I know I'm going off on so many tangents here, but that also makes me think of like Napoleon. Why did he have to take so many architects, engineers and all this kind of stuff when he went to Egypt? And then you've got in the Quran, Muhammad the prophet, he speaks of how Egypt was destroyed and rebuilt. So what was it? Was part of Egypt literally transported from this area into the modern day Egypt? Hence that's why the language travelled there, the hieroglyphs, the stories, the tales, the ancient mythology and things like that. But yeah, I'm going off on a tangent, so I apologise. I'm just going to read briefly now from where Troy once stood. Like I say, this is Iman Wilkins' book regarding the Trojan conflict in East Anglia. And again, if anyone has got the money and can afford it, purchase this book. The details, the information in there, highly recommended. And I thank you, Marshall, again for providing me with this, putting me onto it. So I'm going to read now. Troy on the GogMagog hills. If the dikes in the plain near Cambridge were originally the war dikes mentioned in the Iliad, it is not difficult to find the hills on which are steep and windy, on which the steep and windy city of Troy with its wide streets was situated, thus confirming Caliux's theory. On the GogMagog hills south of the Fleam Dyke and a few miles southeast of Cambridge. The peculiar name of the hills is a reminder of the most terrible war of prehistory of which the prophet Ezekiel seems to have referred to as a warning to the people of Israel. He mentioned an attack by an alliance of peoples wearing armour and accompanied by horses. Under the command of Gog, king of Magog, which provoked such carnage that the birds came to feed on the flesh and blood of the kings and heroes. It is not unlikely that the prophet had the Trojan War in mind, as countless human bones and bronze weapons were found in the region of GogMagog Hills. As silent witnesses of the Great War nobody remembers, the Bible mentions Gog and Magog again in the book of Revelation, also known as the Apocalypse, usually ascribed to St. John, which announces the final war of humanity. So, I'll just read this verse out of the book of Revelations. And when the 1,000 years are expired, Satan shall be loosed out of his prison, and shall go out to deceive the nations which are in the four quarters of the earth, which makes me think of the prose Edda and the four dwarfs in the four corners of the earth. Gog and Magog, to gather them together to battle, the number of whom is the sand of the sea. And they went up on the breadth of the earth, and compassed the camp of the saints about, and the beloved city, and the fire came down from God out of heaven and devoured them. So the fire came down. It also makes me think of fire and brimstone. You know, when you hear of Sodom and Gomorrah, was it chunks like this that would have came raining down? Because this would have been smoking and hot. And we're going to come on to something in a minute that, well, soon, that you're not going to... I'd never heard this, and it's relating to King Og and heat. That's the clue, that's the hint. The earliest biblical mention or name, GogMagog, from the hills near Cambridge is found in a decree of 1574 forbidding students to visit the GogMagog hills on the pain of a fine. The hills the hills form a plateau culminating at a height of around 18 meters above sea level. With some 8 square kilometers, there is enough room for a large city. The town was not situated on the river, but water was available from many springs at the foot of the hills, in particular at Springfield, woohoo, sorry, Simpsons fans, near Cherry Hinton and 9 Wells at Great Shelford. We're going to do a small wiki reading now on this King Og and get a bit more background and context of who he was, and then we're going to look at some of the more mythological elements of, and a few more exciting bits and bobs around this King Og. So Og is introduced in the book of Numbers like his neighbour Sihon of Heshbon, whom Moses had previously conquered at the Battle of Jahaz. He was an Amorite king, the ruler of Bashan, which contained 60 walled cities and many unwalled towns, which his capital at Ashtaroth. Interesting that, because, well, I won't go there. Probably modern Tel Ashtara, where there was still exists a 70 by 20 foot mound. The book of Numbers chapter 21 and Deuteronomy, which we've just been reading from, continues. There's other parts here that I did not mention. We had now conquered all the cities on the plateau and the Gilead and Bashan, as far as the towns of Selecha and Edrei, which were part of Og's kingdom in Bashan. King Og of Bashan was the last survivor of the giant Raphaites. His bed was made of iron and was more than 13 feet long, as we've discussed, which we will touch on again in a moment. Now, apparently Brutus, when he came back to Britain, he defeated a giant who was known to be the last giant of Britain, not Bashan, but Britain. And in this conflict, he had a wrestling match, and this is when Brutus is reconquering the land, as we say, that has long been known, long his kin have long been there, in my eyes anyway, going back all the way to the Alban migrations around 1500 BCE. So you've got this Brutus wrestles this giant, Gog, or, well, yeah, it's Gog, and he wrestles him, kills him, and this throws him off the cliffs of Dover, I believe one tale goes. Now, so you've got this giant in Britain, and you've got Brutus who returns, beats him up, kills him. You've got this giant sarcophagus in the land of Bashan that was made out of iron ore. So we're going to keep moving. Og and the Rapheim. So if you're familiar with the Rapheim, they are the descendants of the Nephilim. And the Nephilim are descendants of, in the book of Revelation I believe it is, those from heaven to earth came and they fell in love with the daughters of man, to which led to the men of great renown, great strength. So you've got this descendant of these ancient giants and mythological beings, almost scriptural, like real if you believe all the scripture, but a lot of people mythological. But yeah, again, to tie in with L.A. Waddle, this is the kind of information that's found in Sumer and over in that part of the world, if you go to Anunnaki and all that kind of stuff. So there's a lot of context that you can go through for this, but we're going to listen to what it says on Wikipedia regarding Og and the Raphaim. In Deuteronomy 3:11 and later in the book of Numbers and Joshua, Og is called the last of the Raphaim. Raphaim is a Hebrew word for giants. Deuteronomy 3:11 declares that his bedstead is the dimensions we discussed before, 13.5 by 6 feet, according to the standard of cubit of a man. It goes on to say that at a royal city of Rabbah of the Amorites, his giant bedstead could still be seen as a novelty at the time the narrative was written. If the giant king's bedstead was built in proportion to his size, as most beds are, he may have been between 9 and 13 feet in height. However, later rabbinic tradition has it that the length of his bedstead was measured with cubits of Og himself. Michael S. Heiser argues that the reference to Og's bed is a link to the sacred marriage, the bed of Marduk, and so the dimensions are not a reliable indicator as Og's size. So you've got this contriving notion there where you've got what's stated in the scripture and then people trying to flip what's in the scripture. Obviously we come across this kind of stuff all the time, so I've got to put that in there because I don't know, it could be one way or the other. It states also that Bashan, or the land of the Raphaim, which is funny, that's again Gog, Magog, giant land, contains hundreds of megalithic stone tombs or dolmens dating from the 5th to the 3rd millennium BC. And it goes on to say that this link to the dolmens could prove to be proof that the giants built them, because obviously the megalithic structures, the giant rocks and giant slabs of hard materials that they've been elevated onto other, they almost look like houses, dolmens. I'll put a couple of photographs in. Excuse me. Here now is like more mythological stuff. Again, it's mythology from only a certain perspective. I click on something that says mythology, I present it as mythology. However, personal beliefs, you can believe what you want. Some people believe this to be fact, and I wouldn't disagree. I wouldn't argue with that person because I don't know any better. Excuse me. Now let's discuss who this Og is a little bit further. We are later told how Og had come out to confront the children of Israel, and the Israelites defeated his army in battle. Og is said to be the last survivor of the Raphaim. which were apparently a nation of giants. His bed is described as described before, and it goes on to discuss his potential height. Rashi provides a little more information. He tells us that Og was the last survivor of the Rapheim in a time of Abraham. Now that is significant, and a little bit more in a moment. If you go to the GogMagog hills, there's a place called Abraham or Babraham, Bar Abram. So right there you've got this connection. Let me go back to that article page. So you've got there, let me just retrace my steps. Rashi provides a little more information. He tells us that Og was the last survivor of the Raphaim in the time of Abraham. So right at the foot of the GogMagog hills in Cambridgeshire, you've got a place called B. Abraham, which, I mean, come on. I mean, I'm not trying to say that this is the area, but there's definitely a connection to this story, whether it came from the west and travelled out east, or came from the east and travelled out west. That is the conundrum, but there's got to be a connection here, surely. So we continue. It was then that the king Amraphel, together with his allies, dominated the Fertile Crescent region and decimated many nations that inhabited it. One of these groups of victims were the Rephaim, and Og was the sole survivor among them. He was a refugee mentioned in Genesis 14:13 that came to Abraham to inform him of what had happened. So you've got Gog, Magog, Og, Abraham, B. Abraham in this area. I mean, it's fascinating stuff, and like I say, this iron ore that his sarcophagus was made out of, that is strewn about all over the place. So this is, I'm going to read now, this is part of the Talmud. Excuse me, the Talmud, Nidia 61a, that's the reference of which part of the Talmud, tells us that Og was the grandson of Shemaizeh, I hope I'm pronouncing that right. As we have written previously, Shamazi or Shamazeh was one of the two rebellious angels that had descended to earth. These two angels argued before God that he should not have created man, who was so faulty and pathetic. God, however, told the angels that had they been on earth and given the same challenges that man had faced, they would be even worse. The angels wanted to be tested anyway, and were thus brought down into earthly bodies. Of course, just as God had said, they quickly fell into sin. This is what is meant by Genesis 6:2, which describes divine beings mating with human women. Say, those from heaven to earth came and mated with the daughters of man. Their offspring, initially called the Nephilim, were large and powerful and were seen as giants by common people. However, during the great flood of Noah, all of these semi-angelic beings perished except for one, Og. So, in Midrashic text, Midrashic, it's a cool name, cool word, Midrashic text famously record that Og was the sole survivor of the great flood, aside from Noah and his family. Now this is where the connection with heat and King Og comes together that I mentioned earlier on in the video. Get on this because I'd never heard of this. He swore to Noah that he would be his family's eternal servant if Noah would allow him onto the ark. And that's the Yelkut Shimoni Noach 55, which is the Talmud IBID, not too sure what that means, states that the rainwaters of the flood were actually boiling hot water. Yet the rain that fell upon Og while he held onto the ark was miraculously cool, allowing him to survive. Perhaps Noah saw that Og had some sort of merit after all. His grandfather was one of the angels that had repented. Noah, therefore, showing mercy on Og, made him a special niche on the ark. This is how the giant survived the flood. So you've got a variant account suggests that Og survived by fleeing to Israel, since the Holy Land was the only place on earth that was not flooded. So again, you know, you've got this interesting contextualized narration of what happened, where Og, the last survivor of this giant race, somehow survived by clinging onto Noah's Ark, and he ended up in the land of Israel. That's another theory. However, where's Israel? Who was Israel? There's many different theories on this. So it goes on again. This is where he's Abraham's servant. So again, the link between Og and Abraham. As promised, Og became the servant of Noah and his descendants. Zoe 3 says that he served Abraham as well as part of his household, was also circumcised. That must have been a difficult task, circumcising a 13-foot man, or 9 to 10 foot man. Rashi quotes the Midrash in telling us that Og hoped Abraham would go into battle and perish, so that Og would be able to marry the beautiful Sarah. For informing Abraham, Og was blessed with wealth and longevity, but for his impure intentions, he was destined to die at the hand of Abraham's descendants. So you've got Brutus returning to Britain. You've got the area of old Troy called GogMagog Hills. You've got the story of Brutus battling a giant called Gog, and at the foot of the hills, I say, you've got the place called Bar Abraham, or B Abraham. Brutus, Abraham, I don't know what's going on. There's some kind of connection there, but like I say, you start to put all this together and you've got a very fascinating story and a very impressive link for me right there, because it's not coming from one source. We've discussed several different sources in this video, and it all kind of links together. When you start reading the different sources, they're all kind of pointing at each other to say that there's links between this connection of GogMagog Hills and King Og. Like I say, there's connection in the land, there's connection in the scripture, there's connection in people's lifetime research, there's connections in the archaeology, there's connections in the Talmud, the Zohar. You know, there's a lot of information that's correlating this. Again, I'm not trying to say where or when this took place, but there's clear connections running all the way through it. And bloody hell, this has been on for, well, a bit too long, to be honest. I'm probably going to wrap it up there. Like I say, there's a few more things I could probably discuss on this, but I think I've made the point there. I'll put some images where I can in this video, of course, and stay tuned because there's still a lot of stuff to come out. I've had a really busy few weeks again. I keep having spells where I can't sit down and do these videos. The recording takes long enough, but then I've got to do the post-production and the edit, and it just takes a little bit too long. I might just have to start leaving a lot of the imagery out, because to be quite honest with you, one of the hardest parts of making these videos is it's not the information, it's not the recording, it's the post-production, and it's sourcing the images. There's so many images that they take forever to find because they're like hidden in dark parts of the internet. Excuse me. So with that said, like I say, this probably ran on long enough. Thanks to anyone who stuck in there and hung around. I'd like to know what your opinions are on Gog and the connection between King Og, the connection between this king who fought this epic battle in the book of Revelation with all these different tribes. You know, is that a reference to the Trojan War? You've got, there's a lot of information there. Giants, Nephilim, Rapheim, Abraham, GogMagog Hills, Brutus. Yeah, let me know what your thoughts are, guys, and I'll catch you on the next video. Stay safe. Peace.